us from Cornwell, the UK side of the G7 summit, is Voice of America Indonesian Services Patsy Widakuswara. Patsy, thank you for joining us. Now, U.S. President Biden is urging other members to do the same, to give more vaccine donation. But as we know, the UK is still struggling with their own parliament. Japan and Canada have their own issues, vaccination rates under 10%, and other members are at different stages of vaccinating their own populations. Are you confident that the other G7 countries will be able to fulfill this pledge?
Well, first of all, Ralph, we have to see the pledge, right? And we haven't seen that pledge. The G7 is not set to begin until another 2 hours. And once we see the pledge, what we really need to look at is essentially the timeline and the deliverables, basically all the fine prints in terms of just how much the G7 countries are willing to give, when they will give it, and so on. But no doubt this announcement that there will be 1 billion doses of vaccines delivered by the richest countries of the world is a welcome news, even by activists. Of course, some will say that it's not enough because there are 7 billion people in the world. You need 14 billion vaccines if there are 2-dose vaccines. But certainly this is a signal from the G7 that they're saying that, look, world, we hear what you are saying in terms of the vaccine imbalance, vaccination rate imbalance in the world. The UN Secretary General said that the imbalance is so shocking. You know, there are some countries like the US, for example, where we are vaccinating children. My son is vaccinated. He's received 2 doses of the vaccine from Pfizer. While in some countries, they are not even able to vaccinate their health workers and their seniors. So there's certainly an acknowledgement from rich countries that we need to do more, we need to step up to the plate. And that is exactly the message that Joe Biden is trying to deliver as he dropped this big news of 500 million doses of Pfizer and basically saying, look, the rest of you have got to step up here at the G7. So we'll see what kind of pledge they'll come up in the next 3 days.
All right, Patsy. And what is exactly the motivation behind this United States move exactly?
I'm sorry, you're going to have to repeat that. I can't hear it in my ear.
Yes, Patsy, what is the motivation behind this U.S. move?
Right. So yesterday, Joe Biden said that, he wanted to do this because he wanted the world to get over the pandemic. And then obviously there's also a self-interest there. And this is something that Joe Biden acknowledged himself. The first one is that he realized that America will not be safe until the world is vaccinated because of variants. And also because obviously the world economy is not going to recover until we all get out of this coronavirus pandemic. And the United States needs the world to have a healthy economy. And as we've also seen in the package that I've reported, this is also an alternative that's the U.S. is trying to provide to Chinese vaccine diplomacy. As you've seen, China has given out its vaccines, sold its vaccines to a number of countries in Southeast Asia, in Africa, and basically giving them, and some say that they come with strings attached, right? I mean, these are either political or economic or diplomatic concessions that China has asked in return for their vaccines. And this is something that the US is trying to say that, look, China is not the only alternative. We have this alternative, it's free, and it comes with that strings attached. That is the message that came out again from Joe Biden yesterday.
All right, now moving aside from COVID, climate change is also the big issue in this G7. What can we expect from this meeting?
Well, this is really the big thing that's coming out of Boris Johnson, right? Boris Johnson wants to be seen as the leader in climate change. And he wants to remind people that, look, we're all focused on this COVID crisis, but there is another crisis that's not acute, but chronic and existential, and that is the climate crisis. So the expectation is that the leaders will come up with some kind of foundational pledges going forward towards the COP26 meeting. This is the big climate change meeting that's coming up in Scotland in a few months. And again, here in the US, the US is trying to come across as being seen again as a leader, particularly after 4 years of Donald Trump. As you know, the US has been largely absent from climate change discussions. The US under Trump pulled out of the Paris Climate Change Agreement. This is certainly something that Joe Biden is trying to change. He is supporting all the pledges that's going to be made on the G7 on this climate issue.
All right, Patsy. Last year's G7 has failed to produce a communique due to the disagreements between President Trump and also the other world leaders, G7 leaders. What about this year? Can we expect a communique this year?
I asked that question to Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor to President Biden, aboard Air Force One. I told him exactly that. Look, last year there's a whole bunch of disagreements between President Trump and key leaders, and G7 came out with nothing, essentially. This was in 2018 in Biarritz, where I also covered it. Can we expect a communique now? Can we expect an agreement from these rich countries, whether it's on vaccine diplomacy, whether it's on climate change? And he said, we never know what will happen in an international format, but yes, we can expect some kind of declaration. And we've already seen that kind of convergence, both in terms of vaccine sharing and in climate change. One more thing I'd like to add about vaccine sharing is I think the G7 is the format where rich countries can say to the world, look, we know that you've been looking towards us to come up with some sort of vaccine strategy against the world. And we know that we've been accused of vaccine hoarding. And this is a well-founded accusation. By one estimate from the One campaign, for example, there's more than 1 billion doses, surplus doses that will not be used by all these countries, the G7 and other rich industrialized nations. So there's really a need for these wealthy countries to start looking outward, to start helping other countries. And of course, as you said earlier, Ralph, these countries are at different stages of preparedness. Japan and Canada, they have less than 10% of their population vaccinated. So we'll see what kind of commitments will come out in the next 3 days.
All right, Patsy, last question. Are there any specific figures as to how many Southeast Asia nations would get vaccine donations?
Right, so all these donations will be given through COVAX, that as you know, the UN mechanism to ensure that lower and middle income countries, including Indonesia, have the same access or have better access to vaccines, because as we know, wealthy countries who have the money and who have the resources have been basically saying this is how much we want from your supply, and therefore creating a bottleneck for everybody else to get their share of the vaccine. And that's why the reason COVAX was created. So COVAX consists of 92 member countries. Indonesia is one of them. I asked White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki just exactly how much is the breakdown specifically by country. And she said that we're not able to provide that yet. So this will definitely be decided both by the US, because the US is supplying the 500 million vaccines, and also by COVAX. So they'll be working together to determine how much will be allocated to each country, including Indonesia and other Southeast Asian countries.
Okay, thank you, Patsy, for the report. Patsy Widakuswara, Voice of America Indonesian Service, joining us live from Cornwell, UK, site of the G7 summit.